This past weekend I participated in Ludum Dare 43. Ludum Dare is a game jam that challenges participants to create a game fitting a specific theme over the course of a weekend. The theme this time was Sacrifices Must Be Made, and this is the making of my entry, Hazardous Cleanup. So the jam began at 8 p.m. Friday evening, so promptly at 7 I went to go see the movie Widows, starring Viola Davis. Highly recommended, by the way. With the movie out of the way, I returned home at just before 10 to see the theme revealed. My wife's initial reaction filled me with determination.
Good luck with that.
And for the next few hours, I workshopped a couple of ideas on paper. My initial idea was a civilization simulation where players would send out their tribe to perform certain tasks, like hunting and gathering, or building shelters, or reading. The caveat being that regardless of what the task was, some portion of the tribe would die doing it. The survivors, of course, would learn from the deaths progressing the game, but after thinking through the size of a project like that, I decided to try something else. My next idea was a twist on the typical save the princess from the castle trope, but instead of playing the strapping young prince, you were an old and decrepit lord. But you had lots of servants that were ready to die for you. Satisfied, I went to bed, ready to start in the morning. The next morning, I began creating a few scripts based around movement and input. The input handler would be responsible for registering button presses and resolving the contradictions to eventually send to the movement script. I exposed a couple of variables to make sure that what was working and what wasn't working was more visible while I fixed bugs and adjusted settings. I really wanted to just use Unity's physics to do the heavy lifting for me. I just wanted to define a couple of movement forces and then let friction and drag bring me to a stop. But after a little trial and error, I realized that I just wasn't going to be able to get the level of control that I desired, so I scrapped that in favor of a little more manual intervention. So instead, I defined a top speed and time to start variable. At Awake, I would use the top speed divided by the time to start to capture the acceleration. Then when input was applied, I would apply that acceleration directly to the velocity of the rigid body over time until the top speed was met. Once the input stopped, I would capture the opposite of the current velocity and divide that by a time to stop variable to get the acceleration I needed to slow down with. And then I would continue to apply that acceleration until input started or I hit 0. These settings helped me out a ton. Instead of finicking with the rather abstract notions of forces and acceleration, I was playing with speed and time, something my brain could actually wrap itself around in a tender embrace. It was looking better, but still a little buggy. I had spent too much time anyway trying to create the perfect movement, so I thought, hey, it's time to add characters. Maybe I could hide some of this silliness with animations. I wanted the characters to resemble chess pawns. I wanted the players to view the characters through the same lens that the aristocracy would, and anything that I could do to belittle the representation was important. Hopefully that would help players get comfortable with the notion of killing these people over and over again throughout the course of the game. After creating a simple blacksmith character, I imported him into Unity and started making an animation controller. I created a silly walk and a springy jump, and just like that, my movement felt more fluid and natural. By this point, I realized that creating the character and the movement had taken up too much time, and I needed to apply some design by subtraction. So I started peeling away ideas like I was peeling a banana, hoping that the fruit inside was ripe and ready to eat. Because honestly, whatever the hell that fruit was, that was going to be my game. What I ended up with was a puzzle game where you used a host of peasants to disarm/use various traps left in your castle from the previous occupant. Their sacrifices were important to the safety of your family and your future guests. In service of this idea, I built a stacking system where characters would stack on top of one another connected by fixed joints, and then a spike trap. I spent some time trying to get the characters to stick to the spikes since they looked a little silly when they just ran into the side of them. My efforts involved configuring joints, changing physics settings, and managing contact points, and some of the results were kinda silly. Honestly, what I liked best was simply pulling the character towards the center of the spikes and settled for that. I would later add screen shake and some particle effects to kinda hide that it still wasn't great. Come Sunday morning, I carved into the stacking system again to make it a little cleaner and facilitate switching the leader easier. I also wanted to implement the ability to split the stack. To accomplish this, I kept each character as a node in a linked list. They knew about their up, and they knew about their down. Then, I kept the leader node in the input handler, so I was aware of which one was currently selected. Jumping would split the stack, forming pseudo-links so that I could switch between the different stacks later. Finally, I started some UI construction. I chose a wood and cloth style to make it stand out against the stone backgrounds, and each UI piece was its own separate scene that I loaded over the top of the level you were playing on. Animations were easy because they were all drop-downs or glows, but by far the most fun thing was coming up with the little phrases that celebrated the deaths of several peasants. Finally, the game was basically done. I added some bad particle effects and some screen shake and started building out the levels. I tried to tutorialize the levels by bringing in individual mechanics represented by drawings on the walls and had the levels slowly ramp up in difficulty as they went on. I actually ended up having a little time to spare, so I added a baby pickup that would give you an extra peasant to add a little bit of depth to some of the later levels. With the night coming to a close, I recorded some very simple sound effects and implemented them using the same triggers that I used for the animations. I was actually quite proud of the final product, and I spent the rest of the evening running through the levels, trying to break the game and fix whatever bugs remained. While technically I had Monday to actually finish things up, my adult life was getting in the way and I had to go to work, so instead I created a build and threw it up for others to play. Overall, I was really satisfied with my efforts and glad that I got the chance to do this. I work in Unity for a living, but typically only get to do things with UI and UX. This gave me a chance to try out some of the Unity's newer features like tile map, play with physics, which is always fun, and explore being creative the whole process through. My biggest takeaway is I'm more familiar with what my limitations are. There is really no more humbling experience than realizing something isn't quite as easy as you thought it would be in your head. And in my experience, that's often the case in game development. What's important, of course, is not to be discouraged by your own weaknesses, but to understand them. Improve on them if you can, and sometimes just work around them. So, I'm the Owl from Alan Jackalope, and that was my game. I hope that you get a chance to play it, and it brings you some amount of joy. Thanks for watching.